Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Yevamot. This is our ninth class in this Masechet, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 58 through 64. We had some sensitive information, sensitive topics last week, so I'm glad everyone is here and has returned. This week, as Lynn mentioned, we're going to have some very famous discussions. But first, we're going to go back to a discussion that we started last week. Last week, we had ended with the concept of the Gemara asked, is there such thing as making a chuppah for women who are not supposed to be getting married, who are pasul, who cannot get married? What does this mean? As we know, a Jewish wedding is generally done under a wedding canopy. A chuppah is a wedding canopy. And the question is, right, last week we discussed betrothing someone who was prohibited, and we talked about marrying in the sense of completely marrying, in the sense of having relations as well. All those things work in the sense that it is prohibited. The question is, what if you make a chuppah? Again, this is not with having relations. It's literally just having the wedding. Is that seen as she is already what's called psula, invalid, from let's say marrying a kohen afterwards? Or is the chuppah, the wedding ceremony itself, not enough in order to make her a full-fledged wife? Rather, they need to have had relations as well. So that is at the bottom of Daf 57 and the beginning of Daf 58. Because we have this idea of betrothal is, right, kiddushin is an actual acquisition. It has halachic, it has legal ramifications, whereas chuppah, the actual wedding canopy, is not enough to create an acquisition, to create the reality of being married, even though, of course, it is one step closer to marriage. And then maybe the Gemara says, well, maybe when we mentioned the wedding canopy, we meant the entire wedding ceremony, which includes afterwards them having relations. From here, the Gemara goes on to discuss the sotah. The woman who is suspected of having an affair. There's a whole masechet about the sotah woman. It is not as simple as a man is jealous and he thinks his wife is having an affair, so he takes her to the temple, and there's a quite I would say a dramatic ceremony done. There's a lot there. There's a lot behind it. So we'll talk about that another time, all the details. But basically, this woman, when she gets to the temple, the priest, the Kohen, she has to swear that she did not seclude herself with this man who she was suspected of being with, not while she was engaged, and neither when she was married, or even the Gemara adds here when she was a shomeret yavam, right? Let's say she was waiting to do yibum. So the Gemara mentions here that this as well, that she also needs to swear that she was never with this man. And the Gemara here, as well as in Masechet Sotah, explains that it also has to be that her husband was not with her after he accused her of having an affair. In Masechet Sotah, it explains that once he accuses her, they are no longer allowed to be together till the entire ceremony is over. If he was with her, then the ceremony will not work. It is not valid. Um, and the Gemara says as well, she needs to have been married to her husband when he accused her. So they said maybe, again, maybe it's not really from when they were only engaged, but only when they were married. Um, and again, um, the Gemara says maybe the case is that she was waiting to do Yibum with him, and then he warned her, and then he did Ma'amar, right? So Ma'amar, remember, is the betrothal in the world of Yibum, and that's enough to create that relationship. From here, the Gemara brings up a term. In Hebrew, the term is Gilgul Shvu'ah, which means that once they're already making her swear something, they can add to that, to the text, right? If she's already taking an oath that she didn't do X, you can ask her to take an oath that she didn't do Y. And here the Gemara says that really the woman, the sotah, only needs to take an oath that she didn't seclude herself with this other man when she was married. But if already he suspects her from before, we can add another another oath in this ceremony, and she would have to swear also that she didn't seclude herself when she was only engaged or betrothed and not just when she was married. The next case is we have a Kohen, let's say his name is Shimon, and he does ma'amar to his brother's widow. Okay, remember we had Reuven is married to a woman, he dies, his brother does ma'amar. Again, they are both priests. And she is the daughter of a priest as well. And there's another brother, remember Levi. Now, the Gemara says that since Levi can do Yibum with her, then she's considered kind of waiting to do Yibum, but that Yibum is not allowed, right? Meaning because Shimon did Ma'amar with her, she's already, kind of already halfway there to Shimon. Now, Levi really could do Yibum with her, but shouldn't because that will mess everything up. Therefore, the Gemara teaches us that this woman cannot eat truma till she does Yibum with one of the brothers. Again, truma is food that has been sanctified, and only priests are allowed to eat from this food. Not only priests, and we'll see this later on tonight, not only priests, but a priest's wife, his children, his slaves, anybody who is in his household is allowed to eat truma. But the Gemara explains that ma'amar is not enough. She has to actually have done yibum with him, and then she can eat truma. Okay. Then, right, if she goes back to her father's house, right, let's say they do chalitza, then she can eat truma from her father. Remember, she's the daughter of a Kohen, so she can eat truma when she's in her father's house, meaning when she's single, or after she does chalitza. Now, okay, now the Gemara at the bottom of 58, the beginning of 59, gives us a case of a high priest, a Kohen Gadol, who does kiddushin. He betroths a minor, and then she becomes an adult. Now, in general, we know that a girl becomes an adult when she is 12. Here, it's important to understand that there's actually an intermediate stage, that a girl is seen as a minor till she is 12. From 12 to 12 and a half, she's called a na'ara. Maybe you'd call it a young maiden. And then from 12 and a half and on, she's called a bogeret, an adult. Now, the Gemara teaches us that based on a verse, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, must marry a woman, a girl who's a virgin, a betula. and therefore he should marry either a minor or a na'ara. Once she's already an adult, a 12 and a half and up, she's seen as, um, uh, again, less fitting for the high priest. Again, I don't want to get into the, you know, um, the optics of this, or but again, let's talk about just the technicalities. So the Gemara asks if he betrothed her when she was a minor, and now he only marries her when she is over 12 and a half. Is that okay? Do we go according to the betrothal, or do we go according to the marriage? And the Gemara seems to say, based on our Mishnah that we did last week, that really we should go according to the marriage and not according to the engagement. What if a priest got engaged to a widow? That is okay. A priest is allowed to marry a widow, but then before they got married, he becomes the Kohen Gadol. He becomes the high priest. Now, he's not supposed to marry, a high priest is not supposed to marry a widow. So can he marry her or not? The Gemara says, right, again, since they were already engaged, then it seems that he was already like almost married to her. Therefore, that would be okay. Or maybe at this point, she's different, and therefore, when that's the case where he was a priest and then he became the high priest, he is allowed to marry her. And the Gemara says, well, maybe because of that, we go according to the engagement. And maybe here too, we should go according to the engagement with the minor. And the Gemara says, well, maybe there's a difference because here we're talking about a girl who, again, according to Jewish law, seems to, her body is changed from when she was a minor to now when she's an adult, and therefore maybe it would not be okay. All right, let's do the next Mishnah on Daf 59. And again, we've seen these concepts before. Now we're going to learn it in depth. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, cannot marry a widow. And this is either, even if she's a widow from being engaged, meaning she was never married, or a widow from marriage. Again, here the point is that even if she's still a virgin, the issue is that she was betrothed, and therefore it's not seen as permitted for the high priest. The high priest also cannot marry, as we mentioned, a bogeret, a girl who is an adult, meaning over 12 and a half. It seems that she loses some of her bitula, the virgin status. Some, however, say that it is okay. The Kohen Gadol also cannot marry a woman who lost her virginity, but through injury, meaning not from relations. The term in Hebrew is mukat etz, meaning that she, either, nowadays they say, horseback riding or fell or something like that. Again, in Jewish law, none of these things are a problem. However, for the high priest, it would be problematic. So the Gemara says that you might have thought that a widow is only from a marriage, and therefore the Mishnah taught that is not the case, even from when they were engaged. And so too, a regular priest, a regular Kohen, cannot marry a divorcee, even if it's from engagement. Now, this is just important. Erusin is the term in Hebrew. Erusin is not engagement the way we understand engagement. Erusin is actually what we do under the chuppah, like we mentioned before. Part of the wedding ceremony is when the groom says to the bride, "Harei at mikudeshet li," right? When he gives her the ring, that is called erusin, and therefore, That's the kiddushin. Erusin is the bracha that they make under the chuppah, and then there is nisuin. Those are all parts of nowadays of the wedding ceremony. We don't separate it because, as you see here, if someone was to break off an engagement nowadays, unfortunately, when this does happen, nowadays, if you break off a regular engagement, the woman, you don't have to give a get, there's no divorce, you just break it off. If, however, they would have been properly, they would have done erusin the way they did in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, they would actually need a get, which is why nowadays we do all of those things under the chuppah. Okay, from here, again, I don't know, maybe trigger warning, but we did mention this last time as well. Here we're going to talk about violating a woman, whether it's rape or seduction. So the Gemara tells us if a man violates a woman, he needs to marry her. That's actually based on a verse in the Torah. And the Gemara says, though, that's only if he can marry her. Again, if it's a permissible relationship, then he has to marry her. From here, the Gemara continues and talks about again, different types of relations. We did mention this last time, what's called bia shelo kedarka, meaning anal sex. That's not seen as making a woman not a virgin, and therefore it also is not something that makes a couple married in the sense. So therefore, it's not seen as a anyway, it's not seen as regular relations. It's seen as something different. So here the Gemara says that if a Kohen Gadol, if a high priest violated or seduced a woman, he cannot, he cannot marry her, right? Again, because remember, he needs to marry a betula, a virgin, and she is no longer, even though it was because of him, and therefore he cannot marry her. But if he does marry her, the child is what's called a halal. We mentioned this before. The child is seen as not a kohen, not a priest. Or the Gemara says no, maybe the child is seen as okay, but he does need to divorce her, and he does need to give her a get. Daf 60 says that if a Kohen Gadol, again, the high priest, marries a Bogeret, again, remember, we made a list of the women he's not allowed to marry. Let's say he does marry them. He can stay married to her. Again, he shouldn't have done it, but he can stay married to her. Okay. What about a Kohen, a priest, is not allowed to become impure if somebody dies. But he is allowed to become impure if it's his immediate relative. And that's why many times at a funeral, there'll be a separate area for the priests to go, for the Kohanim to go, because they're not allowed into the cemetery proper, or they're not allowed into the room with the dead body. So here the Gemara talks about if a Kohen, if a priest's sister dies, if she was engaged, can he become impure for her or not? Right, so if she's an adult, he can become impure for her. And what if, hold on one second. If she, then the question is, if she can marry a high priest, right? If a woman can marry a high priest, he can become tameh for her, and if not, no, right? Meaning, again, if this Kohen sister would be able to marry a high priest, so then he can become tameh for her. Here, the Gemara talks about a convert who is younger than 3 years old, or she converted, she converted before she was 3 years old, then she can marry a Kohen. This is learned from in the Torah. There's a description of the war with the Midianites, with Midian in the desert. And Moshe says that the warriors can marry any woman that hasn't had relations with anybody yet. And therefore, it seems that they actually checked. It seems they were able to check, not physically, but in a spiritual way. They were able to check to see who was able to marry these men. So too, another case in the Tanakh is the 400 women who were given to the tribe of Benjamin. There was a big war. There was a civil war. Unfortunately, a pretty dark time in Tanakh. There was a civil war, and they killed many people in the tribe of Binyamin, and then they went to find them women, and they found these 400 women, and again it says that they were bitulot, that they were virgins, and it seems that there was a way of checking. Again, I don't mean in a, they didn't do like a physical exam, but they somehow figured out if they were bitulot or not. Here, there's a story of a Kohen who married a priest who married a convert who, again, she converted when she was less than 3 years old. And then there's another one. And then one of them, they didn't say anything. The other one, they told him that he needed to divorce her. And from there, there's the discussion if he can marry this convert or not. Okay, on Daf 61, again, since we were talking about the war with Midian, so they said that during this time, people needed to purify themselves. So it seems that it implies that when they were at war and there were many dead bodies of Midianites who are not Jewish, it seems that that does transmit impurity, even though the Gemara seems to say that non-Jewish bodies do not transmit impurity. And then the Gemara says, well, it depends what kind of tum'ah, what kind of impurity we're talking about. If we're talking about ohel, remember we discussed if you're in the same room as a dead body, that type of impurity is only for a Jew, but actually touching a non-Jewish body, that would make a person impure. The next Mishnah tells us that if a Kohen, a priest, is engaged to a widow, again, that is okay, a regular priest with a widow. And again, as we mentioned, then he becomes the high priest. He becomes the Kohen Gadol. Can the question is, like, can he marry her? And it seems that he can. There's a story of Yoshua ben Gamla, who was betrothed to Marta bat Baitus, and then who was a widow, and then he was appointed the high priest, and he still married her. So we see that he could marry her. The next case is a woman falls to a priest for Yibum. She's called a Shomeret Yavam. She's waiting to do Yibum. Again, then she's a widow, right? Then he becomes the high priest. Even if he does Ma'amar, he cannot marry her. So we have to understand the difference. So the Gemara says this is actually learnt from a verse, the fact that the priest, the high priest, can now marry the widow because they were already engaged before, but there is no verse for the Yevamot, and therefore for Yibum it does not work, but for a regular marriage it does. And also the Gemara points out that in the Mishnah it says that he was appointed the high priest, and from here the Gemara says it seems like Marta had a lot of money, his wife or his fiancé. She had a lot of money, and basically she bribed the king to appoint her soon-to-be husband, the Kohen Gadol. I don't know why she didn't just wait till they got married, but I guess they didn't. They couldn't wait. Next Mishnah on Daf 61. a Kohen Gadol must do chalitza. He cannot do yibum. Again, as we mentioned, Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is not allowed to marry a widow. Therefore, he physically cannot, or I should say, uh, according to Jewish law, he's not allowed to do yibum. Therefore, he has to do chalitza. And again, the Gemara explains whether she was widowed from engagement, meaning from being married, or even if she was only engaged, he still cannot do yibum with her. The next Mishnah, a Kohen cannot marry an Ailonit. We met the Ailonit before. This is a woman who does not um, get to sexual maturity, meaning she's infertile, but not just something wrong with fertility, but she does not go through any puberty. So Kohen cannot marry her. However, if he has another wife and children, then he can. And the Gemara says no. The Mishnah says no. Even if he's already married, it doesn't look nice to marry a woman if you know she can't have children, because then it's obvious that you're only marrying her to have sexual relations with her, and this is making her into a zonah. The word zonah it generally is defined as a harlot, a prostitute, but it really means a woman who is promiscuous, who has, who sleeps around, and therefore the Mishnah seems to be saying that if you set aside a woman for only having sex, so that's not appropriate. And the Gemara says no. Still the Mishnah says no, that doesn't make her a zonah. A zonah is only a person who is really, set aside just for this, loose behavior, right? Just to have relations for, promiscuity, and that's it. So that would not be called a znut in our case. The Gemara says that why can't the Kohen marry an Ailonit? Because the Kohen needs to do pru urevu, right? The Kohen, the priest, needs to fulfill the commandment of having children, of procreation. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, just the Kohen has this commandment? Everybody has this commandment. So the Gemara says, what's different about the Kohen? It's even if he has another wife. Because again, it's not right for him to have these two wives. The Kohen can't marry a ktana, a minor, again, because this minor might not be able to have children. We don't know if she will reach puberty or not. Therefore, you have to wait to see that she matures. And from here, and we'll talk about this another time, right, if minors are allowed to do yibum, right, and here the Gemara tells us that minors cannot do yibum or chalitza, because it says ish, a man, needs to do chalitza, and a boy under 13 is not called an ish, right? He's a yeled. So too the woman as well. We're going to learn the woman from the man, and she also needs to be an adult, but we'll discuss that. The Gemara is going to talk about this later. The Gemara now goes on to the topic of znut, again, this promiscuity, and the Gemara says that's not it, right? What's a zonah? It's a married woman who has relations with someone else, with someone who she's not allowed to be with, or any woman who freely, is having relations with people. And another opinion is it's even two people who are single who have premarital sex. We actually say that is not the halacha. That is not seen as znut. As we said, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, can't marry a minor because, again, it doesn't really work. The betrothal doesn't work 100%, or maybe it's only talking about a regular Kohen. Again, as we said, we want to make sure that she is able to have children. The next Mishnah on Daf 61 tells us that a person can't withhold from having children unless he already has children. And here we're going to get into an entire discussion about the commandment of pru uravu, which means, right, the commandment to procreate, to have children, right? God tells Adam in Breshit, in the very beginning of the Torah, that we'll see, mankind or man has the obligation to have children. And now, right, we say there's an obligation to have children. How many? What? What does that look like? So the Mishnah tells us, Beit Shammai says procreation or children means 2 boys. Beit Hillel says a boy or a girl, right? Because the Torah says God created Adam, right, man, Zachar unekeva, right, male and female. Therefore, Beit Hillel learns that you must have a boy and a girl. So the Gemara says that not only that, but even let's say you have fulfilled your obligation, you have to stay married. It's not like you fulfill your obligation and then that's it, it's finished. Because again, the Gemara tells us, the Torah tells us, Lo tov heyot adam levado. It's not good. This is in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, of Breshit. It's not good for a man to be single, meaning people are meant to be married. If he has children already, he can marry a woman who cannot have children. Beit Shammai, where do they get this idea of two boys? They get it from Moshe, right? Moshe has 2 boys, and then he separates from his wife. Again, they don't get divorced, but he separates from her because he wants to be prepared in case God reveals himself to him, and therefore he separates after having 2 sons. Beit Hillel say that God created the world with male and female, right? Adam and Chava, right? And therefore one needs to, emulate God in the sense of having a boy and a girl. Daf 62 tells us that Moshe did 3 things that he decided on his own, and God accepted what he decided. So one is that he separated from his wife, right? God didn't tell him to do so. He decided to do it on his own. 2, he broke the tablets, right, of the 10 commandments, and so what does this mean, right? He separated from his wife because he wanted to be ready to receive God. He broke the commandment, the luchot, the tablets, because he reasoned that, right, the Jewish people did idolatry, so they shouldn't have the Torah. And the 3rd thing was that he added a day of separation for the Jewish people to separate from each other before receiving the Torah. And this is very appropriate as we get closer to Shavuot. The idea that God actually told the Jewish people to separate for 2 days, and Moshe added a day, and therefore they separated for 3 days. Another way of understanding Beit Shammai, again, Beit Shammai said 2 sons. Another opinion of what Beit Shammai says is that actually he says 2 sons and 2 daughters. And this is learned from Cain and Hevel. The verse seems to imply that each one of them had a sister, and therefore it was 2 boys and 2 girls. Or maybe Beit Shammai say one boy, 1 girl, and then Beit Hillel says either a son or a daughter. So that's a different way of understanding the machloket. Now the Gemara asks again a very interesting question in terms of how far do we we push the boundaries of these laws. So the Gemara asks, what if a person had children before they converted? Does that count? Right? So on one hand, they're repopulating the world, and non-Jews also have this commandment of having children. On the other hand, we say that when a person converts, they're like a new person. So maybe that child is not seen as their child anymore, and therefore they need to have more children afterwards. So the Gemara says it seems to say that when they convert, they do need to have more children, meaning those children, kind of count for lineage, but they have to, they start over when they convert. Another question, I would say a tragic one, is what if a person had children, but then those children die in the parent's lifetime, right? Is it seen that they fulfilled pru uravu or no, right? Meaning on one hand, they did what they needed to do. On the other hand, they're not leaving that legacy afterwards. So the Gemara actually says that grandchildren are like children, and if you have grandchildren, that does fulfill the commandment, right? So if you have a son and a granddaughter, that would work, and it's just an interesting case, a sad one, but an interesting case. The Gemara describes Rav, or tells us that Rav Sheshet actually became sterile because he went to Rav Huna's class. Rav Huna was known to give very long classes. I try to talk very quickly, but he was known to give very long classes, and the students felt it was disrespectful to leave, and therefore they stayed there so long, and they held in the fact that they needed to go to the bathroom, that it seems that caused sterility, and we'll actually see this later on, but unfortunately many students suffered because of this as well. I don't know why nobody stopped him, but I don't know. Okay, let's go back. If a man's wife dies, so then he should remarry and have more children, right? Or maybe, right, if he, sorry, one second. Right, or maybe, right, so the Gemara says, just like you need to remarry and have more children, so too when you learn, maybe this was talking about learning Torah, that when you learn Torah when you're young, you should also learn Torah when you are older, right? And the same thing with students. You should have students when you're young, and when you are older. And from here, the Gemara very famously mentions the students of Rabbi Akiva. And again, this is very appropriate to this time of Sfirat HaOmer, of the Omer between Pesach and Shavuot. The Gemara describes how Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 sets of students, meaning 24,000 students, and they all died at the same time, meaning in this period between Pesach and Shavuot. Why did they die? Because they were not respectful of each other. And then Rabbi Akiva went, and after he lost all these children, all these students, right, like children, the Gemara says that he went out and found 5 more students, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. These were his 5 new students, and they were the ones who sustained Torah for the next generation, because literally an entire generation of students were wiped out. One second, I see a comment. What about the children of a Jewish woman who lived lived un-Jewishly when they were conceived, and then led later to convert to reinstate her standing in Israel, are the prior children Jews? I'm not sure. Do you mean there's like quotes? So do you mean is as long as she's Jewish, her children are Jewish? Again, here I'm speaking about halachically Jewish, again, in the Orthodox way. If not, if let's say a person converts, I guess, Reform or conservative, and then later on, and has children, and later on converts to Orthodoxy, the children need to convert. But they are, so that, I don't know if that was the question. Okay. Here we're going to talk about marriage. It will start very positively, but unfortunately, it will take a little bit of a turn. So let's start with the positives, right? A man needs to be married, as we mentioned before. It brings happiness and blessing and goodness. And if not, right, he will not be able to learn Torah, or he won't have walls, or he won't have peace. Meaning, a wife leads to happiness in so many different areas. You also, the Torah, and we'll talk about this in another Masechet, but here the Gemara describes the importance of having relations with your wife. In other Masechtot, it talks about how often, what the frequency is, but it is important to make sure that the couple is sexually active, that they are together, and this is very important. And basically, is part of the marriage and very important. Daf 63 tells us, Rabbi Elazar tells us that if a man isn't married, he's not considered a person, right? I think here it's meant to say that a woman completes you, that together they make a whole person. He also says that if you don't own land, you're not a person. He talks about the concept of being an Ezer Kenegdo. It says in Genesis that the woman is going to be a helpmate, but the word is, right, a helpmate opposite him. So what does that mean? Right, again, very famously, if he merits, then she will help him, right? She will be the helpmate, help person. If not, then she will be opposite him, right, against him. And he says, right, why should I be so thankful to the woman? Because look at all the things that she does for you. She feeds you, she clothes you. That is important. And again, right, Adam was looking for his soulmate and only found her in Chava. Right, again, God grafted two nations to Israel, and the importance of those converts, right? Again, I think, and we've said this previously, the importance of converts and how beautiful it is when people convert and join Judaism. Again, as we get closer to Shavuot, we really do celebrate converts and people who have taken upon themselves to become part of our nation. So the Gemara mentions like how great it is that God joined these nations, these people to Israel, right? Ruth from Moab and Naamah from Ammon. Naamah was the wife of Shlomo, King Solomon. He talks about in the end of days, craftsmen will turn into farmers because they will be able to, they won't be seeking physical, what's the word? I can't even think. Right? They won't need salaries. They won't need to need income. They will be able to sustain themselves just on the land. Though he continues and says, again, this is Rabbi Eliezer. He also says, Elazar. He also says that farming is the worst profession, and really you should go into business. It makes much more money. So it's interesting those two sides of the coin, right? He says, and now there's going to be a lot of advice, right? So you can jump to buy land, but you should be very careful when choosing a wife and also when choosing your friends. And now, unfortunately, we're going to take a turn. And now the Gemara is going to talk about how bad it is to be married to a bad woman. We'll see what that means. But as you will see, this is based on I guess, personal experience. Unfortunately, it seems that some sages had really bad marriages, and unfortunately, their perspective on marriage is clouded by, or at least influenced by their reality. And therefore, there's a line that women are worse than death. There are stories of Rav, how his wife tortured him, again, more in terms of, was always arguing with him, didn't do what he said, didn't do what he liked, always did the opposite. Rabbi Chia, his teacher as well, his wife really drove him crazy. But interestingly enough, Rabbi Chia teaches his students that he always gets gifts for her. So it's interesting that although they didn't have the best relationship, he still gives her gifts. Why does he give her gifts? Because he says you have to realize that she is raising my children, and I'm thankful for that. Like, yes, she drives me crazy, but at least she's raising my children. And from here, again, the Gemara talks about a good wife and how that's so great versus a bad wife who is so bad. And again, based on the verses that we've mentioned before. From here, the Gemara discussed the Chaberim. This was a nation, a sect of Persian priests who persecuted the Jews. Again, as unfortunately we've seen, that anti-Semitism really existed, unfortunately forever. And they issued 3 decrees against the Jews. And basically they say, what were these decrees? They were what's called midah keneged midah. They were measure for measure because the Jews didn't keep certain laws. They had these persecution. So the Jews they weren't careful about shchita, about ritual slaughter. Therefore, they wouldn't allow the Jews to do shchita. Why? Because the Jews weren't giving charity, right? They weren't giving from their meat to other people. Therefore, they got rid of shchita. They weren't allowed to go to the bathhouse. The Gemara says because they weren't careful about ritual purity, tarata mishpacha, and they were digging up graves. And it seems it was because the Jews were celebrating these non-Jewish holidays, and therefore it was a punishment. And from here, let's go to Daf 64. So that was, again, a lot more. There was a few more things in there about good wives versus bad wives. The next Mishnah. If you get married and the couple does not have children for 10 years, then they still they still need to have children, and therefore they still need to fulfill pru urvu, and therefore they have to get divorced, or he can marry another wife, right? Take a co-wife, and she, right? And they can, if they get divorced, they can both remarry someone else. This is just important to understand. And again, I don't know historically, but I feel like it's very, very forward thinking that even the Gemara is saying it's not, we don't assume that it's the woman who is barren. We also say that maybe it was the man who was sterile as well, meaning we don't all of a sudden say obviously it was the woman's fault. I feel like definitely in Tanakh, at least we get the sense that people assume that it's the woman, but here the Mishnah tells us very clearly that assumption is not the case. And then if they get divorced and they marry other people, they stay married. They can be married for another 10 years. And again, that's the time period they have. If unfortunately the woman miscarried, so then you count the 10 years from the miscarriage, meaning not that is seen as a pregnancy, and therefore you don't count from when they got married, but from the miscarriage. The Gemara explains that if they do get divorced after 10 years, he must give her the ktuva money. Again, the ktuva money shows that we're parting ways and there is no fault in either person. Again, the point is that maybe it was his issue, maybe it was her issue, we don't know, and therefore he has to give her the ktuva money. We learn it from Abraham that after they were married for 10 years, once they were in Israel, then he married Hagar to bring, right, that's when they had Yishmael. It also, again, this 10-year number doesn't count, like the clock doesn't count, if there was a time when they couldn't be together, if one of them was sick, if they were away, that doesn't count. And from here, again, as I mentioned, interestingly, the Gemara talks about Abraham and Yitzchak as being infertile, meaning they could not have children. So too, Rivka was also barren, again, up until a certain point, and therefore they all prayed to have children. Again, I think the following line is difficult, but the Gemara says, right, why did God make these people barren? Why was it so difficult for them? The Gemara answers, because God loves to hear the prayers of the righteous. These prayers overturn the judgment into compassion, into mercy. Again, I think that this concept is very difficult. I don't presume to understand it. Some say that you only wait 2.5 years, or maybe only 3 years, and then they have to get divorced. But the Gemara says no, even up to 10 years. From here, again, very famously, the Gemara tells us that only men are commanded in pru-urvu, in procreation, and not the woman, which again is interesting, right? Some say, oh, that's so not fair. Others say, well, it's obvious a woman has maybe a natural desire to have children, and therefore it needed to be a commandment on the man because maybe he doesn't have that natural commandment. That's not really discussed here. But as I mentioned, here on Daf 64, the Gemara tells us that there were actually many students of Rav Huna who became sterile, as I mentioned before. It seems that there were 60 students who became sterile. Again, I don't understand why nobody told him to stop talking or to take a break. Like, I don't understand. Okay, from here, the Gemara now gets into a whole discussion that will start today, but we'll discuss more next week, which is that we said that let's say they were married, they didn't have children for 10 years, they divorced, she can marry again. From here, the Gemara seems to say that she can remarry a second time, but not a third time. Meaning, if she was married for 10 years to husband number 1 and didn't have children, then she got married to husband number 2 for 10 years, it seems, the Gemara says, that she can now not marry a third husband because it seems obvious that she cannot have children. This seems to imply that and here we're going to learn a halachic idea, a legal, Jewish legal concept, which is chazaka. Chazaka means, the word means it's strengthened, and it means that if something happens a certain number of times, we'll discuss how many in a minute, but if something happens repeatedly, then it creates a new reality. Now, there's a machloket how many times it needs to be repeated. One opinion is that it is twice, that's according to Rabbi. The other is that it needs to be 3 times, right? It's interesting, in English we say 3 times a charm, right? So here it creates a halachic status, and therefore it's interesting. The Gemara seems to say here that it's 2 and not 3, right? She can marry 2 men, but she cannot marry the third. It seems to imply that once she already had 2 husbands, it makes her the reality is that she cannot have children, and therefore she cannot marry a third husband. And from here, the Gemara brings up another case, which is the case of a child who has hemophilia. Right? Hemophilia is a blood clotting disease. What do you do about circumcision? Right? So the Gemara describes if a couple has a child, they do brit milah, and then the child dies, and then they have another child, and they do brit milah, and the child dies. So then you don't do brit milah on the third child. Or maybe it needs to happen 3 times, and then you don't do brit milah. And then the Gemara says that the law is that chazaka is 3, and therefore the woman actually can remarry a third person. Interestingly, we're going to end today. The Gemara tells us that the law is according to Rabbi, meaning 2. For marriages, meaning, again, she can't marry a third husband. She can only marry 2. So we only go by 2 for marriages, or if you need to give lashes to a person. But we go according to Rabban Gamliel when we're setting patterns of a period, of a veset, when we're talking about ritual purity with nida. The way we create patterns is something has to happen 3 times in a row. And also with the concept of shor mu'ad. This is about an ox who has gored 3 times. If he gores a person 3 times, he's considered dangerous, and it's 3 times and not 2 times. So we are going to end here, and therefore, I want to wish everyone a wonderful week. Lynn, so the mother determines circumcision or not. Perhaps this tradition goes back to Tzipora. I don't know exactly what you mean in terms of the mother being the source of hemophilia. I don't understand the question in terms of... Lynn, can you explain the question? When we say she determines, it means if, right, she's the mother and she has had 2 children who have died versus or 3 children who have died. Yes, she says that the children that the next child cannot have circumcision. It's interesting that you're going back to Tzipora, beautiful, because right, Tzipora was really we see her being very proactive about circumcision. So it's an interesting comparison. Excellent. Okay, excellent, everyone. Thank you again so much for joining me and sticking with it and hanging in there. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we will continue